Good evening, everybody. As you can tell, it's a little bit of a different setup from normal for a Tuesday night Bible study. This is an experiment. You guys are the guinea pigs. This is going to be kind of more of a presentation, like interactive presentation. A little bit more laid back and informal than usual. Another big change for this is I'm attempting to do all this without having any notes printed or on an iPad. Just going to kind of go off the slides, so we'll see how that goes. This has the potential for being the shortest Bible study we've ever done. I already know I'm in the running for the shortest Bible study leader that Grace has had, so we'll just see how this goes. I know it's going to be interesting. I'm sure you guys will enjoy it, and hopefully we'll find it enlightening as well. And before we get started, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, we come before you today to praise you and thank you for all you've blessed us with, for the breath in our lungs, for the day that you've given us, for the rain, for being able to meet here together to study your word and study some historical and cultural phenomena that's found throughout the world that only goes to affirm how true your word is and shows that only through a biblical worldview does any of this actually makes sense. Lord, I pray that you're glorified through this, and may this Bible study go well. In Jesus' name, amen. So as you guys can see from the TVs, this is going to be on dinosaurs, dragons, and ziggurats. How many of y'all are familiar with those words? Ziggurats. I figured that one might be a new word for you guys. But this is going to be a biblical and historical exploration of these cultural phenomena. And this is piggybacking off of The Ark in the Darkness, the movie that we went down to the lake to see back in March, and that we showed the last 2 weeks. Because they talked about dinosaurs and dragons in the movie, and they also mentioned ziggurats, especially with the Tower of Babel. So I figured it would be pretty cool to kind of take a more in-depth look at these two topics. So we're going to start off with dragons. How many of you are familiar with dragons? This is a major cultural phenomena that has swept the world. And you see them in movies all the time. You see them in TV shows. You see them in books. People are fascinated with dragons. But is there historical evidence for the existence of dragons? I'm going to argue that yes, there is. And we have a lot of written and oral histories that support sightings of dragons or the existence of dragons throughout the world. Dragons appear in cultural records and in oral histories throughout the world. They appear in Babylon, in Australia, in China, in Egypt. They appear in England. They appear in Peru, and they even appear here in North America. And by the way, I meant to say this at the beginning. I am recording this, and I'm recording the presentation too. So you guys can go back and rewatch this along with the slides on the computer later. And for anybody joining live, I know you can't really see the TV screens behind me, but this will be edited into a video that we'll post and probably upload a little bit later this week. So you guys can go back and watch it, and you guys that are online can be able to see what all these slides are. So I didn't leave you guys out. So here's a map that shows a lot of these dragons that are found throughout the world. On the North American continent, you have Ogopogo, which was a water serpent. You have Champ from Lake Champlain, which is very much like the Loch Ness Monster. You have the Thunderbird. Many North American tribes have stories of encounters with flying reptile monsters. You have Quetzalcoatl from the Aztecs, one of their main gods. You have an Apatosaurus pictograph and monster legends down in South America. Up by England, you have Nessie, the world-famous Loch Ness Monster. You guys have all heard of that, I'm sure. You have St. George and the Dragon. That's a famous story that you hear as kids. In Africa, you have Mokele Membe, which is a very compelling possible dinosaur that has been seen even in recent times. You have the Kongamato down by Madagascar, another flying reptilian dragon. Up in Asia and Europe, you have Hydra. You hear about that in Greek mythology. You have Beowulf, that epic poem that most of us had to read in high school. He encounters multiple dragons in that story. Were they based on just made up stuff, or was there maybe an element of truth behind that? The Ishtar Gate in Babylon has a dragon depiction on it. You have the Chinese dragons. Everybody knows the Chinese dragons. There's even a year of the dragon in China. In Cambodia, you have the Ta Prohm pictograph of a stegosaurus, and we'll go into that in more detail too. You have the rope and another flying dragon-type creature in Indonesia and the Philippines. And then you have Burundjor down in Australia, which looks just like a raptor that you would see in the Jurassic Park movies. Then I apologize for this and the poor pixel quality, but I couldn't find a better one. But this gives a list of some dragons that are found throughout the world. The Inuit had Aziwagum, a giant reptile. The Dakota Sioux had the Ba'akan, a terrible water monster. They even list the Behemoth from the Book of Job, a giant swamp reptile. And the list goes on and on and on. Even the Cherokee had the Uktana, a horned water monster. Lots of water monster in North American legends. So now let's get into some actual quotes and eyewitness testimony to these things. Some of you guys might be familiar with Herodotus, a famous Greek historian who lived about 500 to 400 BC. And he states that there's a place in Arabia situated very near the city of Buto, to which I went, on hearing of some winged serpents. And when I arrived there, I saw bones and spines of serpents in such quantities as it would be impossible to describe. The form of the serpent is like that of the water snake, but he has wings without feathers, and as like as possible to the wings of a bat. Sounds very similar to dinosaurs you might be, or dinosaur-like creatures we might be familiar with, the pterodactyl or the pterosaur. And as we saw from that map I showed a little earlier, we see lots of such creatures that have been seen throughout the world. And now we have an eyewitness report from Herodotus too. How many of you guys are familiar with Alexander the Great? The boy king who took over the world. Well, how many of you knew that he had an encounter with a dragon? This is a artist's depiction of the encounter that he had. You see the Greek phalanxes, the long spears, and then the traditional round shields that the Macedonians had. And then you see this monster in the cave. Well, let's look at an account. So this is from Claudius Aelianus, from his book On Animals, book number 15, chapters 19 through 20. He goes into detail on this encounter. And he says in 330 BC, after Alexander the Great invaded India, he brought back reports of seeing a great hissing dragon living in a cave, which people were worshipping as gods. One of Alexander the Great's lieutenants, named Onesicritus, stated that the Indian king Abyssaurus, which almost sounds like a dinosaur name in and of itself, kept serpents that were 120 and 210 feet long. How many of you know of any reptiles that are that long in this day and age? Interesting. And subsequent Greek rulers are said to have brought dragons back alive from Ethiopia. Now he gets on to the Alexander story some more in more detail. He says, when Alexander threw some parts of India into a commotion and took possession of others, that is when he captured them through his military campaigns, he encountered among many other animals a serpent which lived in a cavern and was regarded as sacred by the Indians, whom paid it great and superstitious reverence. Accordingly, Indians went to all lengths imploring Alexander to permit nobody to attack the serpent, and he assented to their wishes. Now as the army passed by the cavern and caused a noise, the serpent was aware of it. It has, you know, the sharpest hearing and the keenest sight of all animals. And it hissed and snorted so violently that all were terrified and confounded. It was reported to measure 70 cubits, or about 110, 120 feet, although it was not visible in all its length, for it only put its head out. At any rate, its eyes are said to have been the size of a large, round Macedonian shield. There's no animals that we know of today that would fit that description. Pliny the Younger, another Roman historian, a Roman historian, has this that he writes in Natural History, which he wrote about 78 AD. He says, "It is India which produces the largest elephants as well as the dragon, and the dragon is itself of such enormous size as to envelop the elephants within its folds." So not only did Alexander the Great encounter some interesting reptilian creatures, dragons, but Pliny the Younger, in his book Natural History, also reports India to have massive serpents, so big as to enfold an elephant within its folds. That has to be a large creature, because the elephant is no small little thing. Another Roman, Flavius Philostratus, in his work The Life of Apollonius of Tyana, around 200 AD, writes again about India. He says the whole of India is girt with dragons of enormous size. For not only the marshes are full of them, but the mountains as well, and there is not a single ridge without one. Now the marsh kind are sluggish in their habitats and are 30 cubits long, that is about 45 feet, and they have no crest standing upon their heads. So we have these creatures that live in marshes as well as up in the mountains. And he says they're so plentiful in India that there's not a ridge without them.
Okay, now this is 200 AD, so that is after the flood. So
This is all after the flood.
So were there actual dinosaurs on the ark?
Yes.
Baby dinosaurs, huh?
Yep.
That'd
And
have been.
I'll tackle some of that a little bit later in this talk.
Okay, so he's saying that these marshy guys that were sluggish didn't have crests on their heads, so the mountain ones did?
Yep. That would be the conclusion from what he was writing there, that the ones on the mountains had the crest and the ones in the marshes didn't. So there's a couple different kinds of dinosaurs that those could all line up with. But there's no reptiles alive today that fit these descriptions that we know of. Maybe the Vatican has one or two hidden in its vaults. But we've just gone from about 500 BC to 200 AD. We've covered over 700 years of history, and we're still seeing these same reports. Y'all are familiar with Marco Polo, right? He talks about dragons too. Did you guys know that? He's famous for the Silk Road, but in the travels of Marco Polo, it's recorded that leaving the city of Yaki and traveling 10 days in a westerly direction, you reach the province of Karazhan, which is also the name of the chief city. Here are seen huge serpents, 10 paces in length, about 30 feet, and 10 spans, 8 feet, the girth of the body. At the forepart, near their head, they have 2 short legs, having 3 claws like those of a tiger, with eyes larger than a 4-penny loaf and very glaring. I don't know what a 4-penny loaf is, but I know it's monetary. The jaws are wide enough to swallow a man. Gulp. The teeth are large and sharp, and the whole appearance is so formidable that neither man nor any kind of animal can approach them without terror. Others are met of a smaller size, being 8, 6, or 5 paces long, and the following method is used for taking them. In the daytime, by reason of great heat, they lurk in caverns, from whence at night they issue to seek their food. And whatever beasts they meet with and can lay hold of, whether tiger, wolf, or any other, they devour.
That sounds like an alligator or some large, something like that.
At 30 feet?
Sure. Well, they ate good back then, yeah.
They did. They must have eaten good back then before all the genetically modified
There you
foods
go.
and all
Yeah,
that.
got to 'em.
Where is this city of Monty?
So this is out east. I thought I included it in here and I didn't, and I don't remember off the top of my head. So if one of y'all want to Google that. But I know this is out east. I'm thinking this is China because he traveled to China on the Silk Road, establishing trade networks. But once again, talking about creatures, dragons that sound like the dragons we see in movies with sharp teeth that are large in size and can devour a man in a single bite, also sounds like the Tyrannosaurus Rex almost. Like we can't put an exact name with it, an objective name with it, but again, outside of maybe a crocodile, alligator, there's really no other creature that would fit this description.
Yeah, because he was like the most bad, the meanest, at least if you watch Jurassic Park.
Yeah. Until he got to Jurassic Park 3, and then Spinosaurus took that. Although that was scientifically inaccurate, but.
Okay, so it's that city is in China.
Okay.
In the province of Yunnan. Y-U-N-N-A-N.
Yep. So Yachi is in China, so this report's coming from China. So I've seen a lot from India, and now we're further east in China. And we all know that the Chinese have a huge fascination with dragons. And for sake of time here and time spent researching, I didn't have time to really dig into the Chinese. So I kind of focused on some other lesser known accounts that y'all might not have heard of.
You know, you take these sources and they're as legitimate as can be. Nobody would doubt about Marco Polo. Nobody would say he was lying there. You take it back to the other historians that
Herodotus and Pliny.
But there are people today denying the fact that dinosaurs couldn't be except for the millions of years ago.
Yep.
So whenever these reports come out, what do they do with these facts? This historical facts.
Some people will write it off as they heard, like they're reporting about legends that were heard of by these travelers from like China or India. Other people will write it off as they mistook something that they hadn't seen before. Like if they saw a Komodo dragon that they were not familiar with. They don't know what that is, and it's a massive lizard that's terrifying, so they blow it up into myth. Or they take that they might have seen something that maybe was a dinosaur, or another creature that maybe looked like one, and then they blew it up into some legend. So they try to write it off as being kind of myth, like
Folklore.
yeah, folklore type deals, or a creature that exists today that they blew up into being something that is fantastical.
So they deny even secular sources from people who are very well known. Anything else they would say would be true. But if it gets to there, it now detracts from their carbon dating
Yep.
and everything else they want to believe about evolution and time. And you put this into reality, and it's hard to deal with for them, isn't it?
If you take history at face value, it challenges a lot of the assumptions of mainstream science and the establishment. So this is an interesting story that I found. Like, I'd not heard of this one before. And this is from a booklet from 1614, so now we're getting even more modern, describing encounters with a dragon-like creature in St. Leonard's Forest in Sussex. So this is in the United Kingdom now, over in Europe. And it says, this serpent, or dragon as some call it, is reputed to be 9 feet, or rather more, in length, and shaped almost in the form of an axletree of a cart. A quantity of thickness in the midst, and somewhat smaller at both ends. The former part, which he shoots forth as a neck, is supposed to be an L, which is 3 foot 9 inches, with a white eye-ring, as it were, or with a white ring, as it were, of scales about it. The scales along his back seem to be blackish, and so much as is discovered under his belly appear to be red. It is likewise discovered to have large feet, but the eye may there be deceived, for some suppose that the serpents have no feet. the dragon, rides away, as we call it, as fast as a man can run. His food, rabbits, is thought to be, for the most part, a carnivore rabbit, which he much frequents. There are likewise upon either side of him discovered 2 great bunches so big as a large football, and as some think, will in time grow to wings. But God, I hope not, will, to defend the poor people in the neighborhood, that he shall be destroyed before he grows to fledge. So this is a report from people that had reported seeing this reptilian-like dragon creature in the forests around Sussex. And that was compiled into a booklet that talked about it. Doesn't sound like any reptile we're familiar with, especially not one that exists in England.
When these reports come as dragons, what qualifies this creature to be a dragon to most of these reports that you
Reptilian and with wings and sharp teeth usually. That's dragons were
Do they ever try to get back to the cave and find out if there's gold and jewels and stuff?
I think most people
That
were
was
worried
always
about
part of the
getting
legend.
gobbled up by it, so. But yeah, to qualify as a dragon, dragons were historically qualified as large reptiles, sometimes with wings, large teeth, meat-eating, and very much sounds like a dinosaur.
fire breathing?
Sometimes. Although most people think that that's kind of a historical embellishment, although the Bible does talk about Leviathan doing that. And we do see the bombardier beetle
Thank you.
in today's day and age that does shoot
Yes.
superheated gases out of his abdomen.
Dragon.
So if this beetle can do it and survive, a scaly armored dragon can do it and survive too. No issue. And now let's go to 1890 into the United States. So on April 26, 1890, Arizona's Tombstone Epitaph newspaper published a story about 2 ranchers who encountered a flying alligator-like creature in the Huachuca Desert. Their description of the creature is quite close to a pterosaur. As I mentioned earlier, Native American descriptions of the legendary thunderbird also match the fossil remains of pterosaurs. And there's more than just this account of supposed pterosaur sightings in the United States as well. You have the Van Meter monster in Van Meter, Iowa, that very much matches this sort of description. Some people think it could be a giant bat too. There have been some recent supposed sightings of a pterosaur. There was one that cropped up in Chicago about a decade or so ago, but I doubt that one's credibility, just because if it was in Chicago, there would have been an uproar of sightings, not just 1 or 2 people saying that they saw this creature. But from the field of cryptozoology, which is considered a paranormal science, but I think there's some validity to the actual biological, zoological studies that some of them do when they research creatures such as this. Cryptozoology deals with cryptids, mythological creatures, or creatures that shouldn't exist someplace, or that are being sighted but should be extinct. So strange creatures, out of the ordinary creatures, that's what cryptozoology is. And then zoology being the study of animals. A lot of cryptozoological reports report creatures similar to pterosaurs that have been sighted throughout the world. So that makes somebody scratch their head.
What length about do you think that would have been? Alligator size or?
They didn't give a length with this. They said they cited it.
It's just that flying alligator part kind of.
Yeah.
That kind of blew your mind.
Yeah.
I would say probably 5 to 10 foot in length for the body size, with a 15, 20 foot wingspan. That's about what the pterosaur body size is. And that would be bigger than any bird that we have out here too. Although some of these sightings, I will say, I would have to admit, are probably sightings of birds that people just didn't get a good look at, or it took off close by and startled them, and so in their panic, they misremember the details about the creature that they saw, and thus they're likely to embellish it or think that it was larger than it actually was. But you still can't write off the fact that pterosaur sightings have happened quite a bit The Native Americans report creatures such as pterosaurs. The tombstone epitaph here thought this was credible enough to put a news story out about it. And then the cryptozoology community has a lot of these sightings as well. Now I want to talk about Makili Mimbe. Try saying that 5 times fast. This is an absolutely fascinating creature. Fascinating to the point that a lot of people have gone out to look for it. Even Josh Gates with I forget if it was Expedition Unknown or his Destination Truth TV series. One of those two, they actually went out to Africa to look for this creature. And I'm going to read all of this, so strap in. But Mokili Mimbe, the creature is reported not to live in the smaller rivers, like the 2 Likualas, and in the rivers mentioned only a few individuals, and in the rivers mentioned, only a few individuals are said to exist of this creature. At the time of our expedition, and this is coming from Ludwig Freyer von Stein, Lusnitz, on a German-funded expedition to the Congo in 1913, he says, at the time of our expedition, a specimen was reported from the non-navigable part of the Senga River, somewhere between the 2 rivers Mbayo and Pekunda. So this is in the Congo. Unfortunately, in a part of the river that could not be explored due to the brusque end of our expedition. We also heard about the alleged animal at the Sombo River. The narratives of the natives result in a general description that runs as follows. So the natives of Africa describe the animal as being brownish-gray color with a smooth skin. Its size approximately that of an elephant, at least that of a hippopotamus. It is said to have a long and very flexible neck and only 1 tooth, but a very long one. Some say it's a horn. A few spoke about a long, muscular tail like that of an alligator. Canoes coming near it are said to be doomed. The animal is said to attack the vessels at once and to kill the crews, but without eating the bodies. The creature is said to live in the caves that have been washed out by the river in the clay of its shores at sharp bends. It is said to climb the shore even at daytime in search of food. Its diet is said to be entirely vegetable, which is why it doesn't eat the people that tips out of the canoes.
It only needs 1 tooth.
This feature disagrees with a possible explanation as a myth. The preferred plant was shown to me. It is a kind of liana with a large white blossom, with a milky sap and apple-like fruits. At the Sambo River, I was shown a path said to have been made by this animal in order to get at its food. The path was fresh and there were plants of the described type nearby. But since there were too many tracks of elephants, hippos, and other large mammals, it was impossible to make out a particular spur or track with any amount of certainty. So while this isn't a giant creature, the body is said to be about the size of a hippo or an elephant, with a long neck and a long tail. And when canoes get close to it, it spooks it and it lashes out in defense, dooming the canoes, but it doesn't eat the people it knocks out, which tells you it's vegetarian, which goes right along with what the natives said, saying that they saw it eat the leaves of the liana type plant. That doesn't match any creature we know today.
That 1 tooth thing's really throwing me.
But it does seem to match up with the Apatosaurus, the Brontosaurus, the Apatosaur type dinosaurs that had the long necks and long tail and the round body. And it has been seen and reported numerous times over the last few centuries. And so this is kind of a depiction based on what the locals said of the Baka people of Cameroon of what Makili Mimbe might look like. Again, nothing that matches any creature that we know of today in the scientific living record. And here's a very interesting quote that I discovered, no pun intended with that, from Discovery Magazine. So this is a secular source. But before I read this quote, I want to ask you, we've read all these sightings, all these histories about dragons that seem to match up with dinosaurs. Could they possibly have existed, or is it all just made-up fanciful myth? Well, I came across this quote from Discovery Magazine, which asked that same question, and it says in the article, ancient people conceived dragons and other mythical creatures after finding fossils of even more ancient creatures. That was their explanation for it. If this is true, dragons are not entirely fictional beings. The people who imagined them and told stories about them were imagining and telling stories about animals that once walked the earth. They got the details wrong, that's how they explained it away, just as we often do when studying ancient fossils. So two interesting things. One, I think it's interesting that they're presupposing that ancient people found fossil skeletons. Because if you find just one bone or a couple bones, you're not going to have any idea what that creature might have looked like. So they're presupposing that ancient peoples found full, complete skeletons of dinosaurs, and thus based their stories off of that. I find that very unlikely. In all my studies of ancient societies and ancient cultures and history, I've not seen any evidence that any society did anything along the lines of paleontology or digging for dinosaur bones. If they found a bone, they'd probably just write it off as, okay, this animal died. They were a hunter-gatherer societies. They were used to seeing bones in dead animals. It's not out of the ordinary for them to find a bone. It's not something that's going to grab their attention and cause them to look further. And I also find it interesting that at the end they say, just as we often do, that is, get the details wrong when studying ancient fossils. So they admit that the mainstream scientific community gets details wrong when studying ancient fossils.
I'm starting to think this is real.
Why not?
So now that we've heard these stories, is there any physical, cultural evidence of the existence of dragons? I'd like to introduce you to this ceremonial burial stone from Ica, which is from the Nazca people in Peru. Y'all might be familiar with the Nazca people from the Nazca lines, the big geoglyphic patterns that were carved in the sand, in the ground in Peru, of different creatures, animals, symbols, and geographic patterns. And fun fact about the Nazca lines, those are dated to about 1 AD. So those are being made the time Jesus walked the earth. But this is an interesting burial stone. If you look at it, that creature that's depicted on there doesn't look like anything that we know of today. It's reptilian, 4 legs, has plates on his back, much like a Stegosaurus-type dinosaur. And this dates to 100 BC to about 800 AD, is when this was made, because that's when the Nazca were flourishing in Peru. But the Nazca left us another clue, even more compelling. Are you guys ready to see this? This is a Nazca vase that has this creature wrapped around it. So this also dates to 100 BC to 800 AD. And that depiction at the bottom is a photographic rendering of what the creature wrapped around the vase looks like. Now, if they just saw fossil remains, how would they know that the fossils ended up looking like that? Maybe it wasn't just fossils that they saw. That's a very, very compelling artifact. This is a mural from Bonampak in Mexico. This is from the Mayans. And this depicts a presentation to the Mayan ruler, Chan Muan, of captives and animal heads. Now look in the bottom left corner of the screen. You'll see something very interesting. There's the presentation of a head that looks just like a dinosaur head, a dragon head. the size of the head in relation to the other people, the details, the teeth, the eyes, and when comparing it to the other animal heads, which are pretty realistically displayed in proportion to the humans, it is very hard, if not impossible, to write this off as just being a glorified reptile head or snake head. How did the Mayans know what that creature looked like if they hadn't seen one? Sure, it's possible they based it off a god or a mythological creature, but how'd they get such details like that for a mythological creature even? Staying in South America, this is from Tiwanaku, which is an important pre-Columbian, that means before Columbus got to the Americas, archaeological site in Bolivia. And this particular vase, which depicts two dragons, dinosaurs dare I say, some people think they're fighting each other, kind of hard to tell, but it predates the Inca Empire. And this is estimated to have been made between 1000 to 500 BC. I go back and forth with BCE. I don't see an issue with the updated BCE, CE. I just look at that as saying, hey, it's before church era. They can change the letters if they want. It doesn't change the fact that BCE changes to CE when Jesus was here. Jesus is still the reason we have that split. And they can't get rid of that.
Do you know what they're thinking that was used towards their worship? I mean, I just find it kind of, that they would just, I was wondering if it's part of their worship thing too, that particular creature, where they put offering, something.
That's a very good question. I'm not entirely sure.
I actually think it's a souvenir, for tourists. They have them on t-shirts and everything.
Oh, exactly. I'll just print this out and put it on a t-shirt. There we go.
The coffee mug, is that what you're
Well, what we're saying, between that time, they were actually living. They're not taking up some
And
boxes, right?
it gets even better and more compelling. Okay, I'm glad this was the next slide. I was hoping this was the next slide, but it gets even more compelling than these vases and this mural. Look at this pictograph. This was in the Amazon rainforest basin near Yaman, in the northern province of Utcubamba, Peru.
Took me a
So-
little bit, there's people around it with arrows, that's some of that outside stuff, yeah. With
Yep.
that figure in the middle of it, they're all surrounding it, okay.
So if you look in the middle of this pictograph, there's a creature that doesn't look anything like anything we know today. This pictograph is estimated to be thousands of years old by secular scientists. And it depicts 9 warriors with spears hunting a creature that looks like a dinosaur. And this can't be denied. Secular scientists know this exists and acknowledge its existence. How could they be depicting this if this scene didn't actually exist? And in the 1940s, the American explorer Percy Fawcett brought back reports of a large dinosaur-like creature from this same region of the Amazon. So thousands of years ago, up to not even a century ago, there's evidence of dinosaurs existing in the Amazon. And the Amazon is still largely unexplored. We still don't know everything that exists in the Amazon. Could they still exist?
Yep.
I'd like to know what kind of paint they use. It's around 1,000.
This, if I was to guess, I would say red ochre. Red ochre was a very important powder and substance that they used. It will last forever. I still have red ochre in the back of my car from 2018. No, not 2020. When did we go? 2021? 2021 when I went up to Sunrise, Wyoming, which has the oldest red ochre mine in world history, dating back to the Clovis and now believed to be even earlier than that. Red ochre was a very important religious and ceremonial pigment. It was thought to represent blood, like blood of the earth, so they'd use it in religious ceremonial purposes. They'd also use it for body paint and for making depictions on ceramics and other things that the Indians used. So if I was to hazard a guess, this is probably red ochre, and yeah, it sticks around for forever. The birds and animals that you find up at Sunrise around this ochre quarry, are pink. There's this bird called a rock wren, which is a reddish-brown bird. Threw me for a loop because the first time I saw one when I first went up to Sunrise in 2017, it was purplish red. I'd never seen a rock wren that's a purple-red color before. Yeah, the red ochre stains everything. My hiking boots are covered in it. I have shorts that still have the stains in them, so it doesn't go away. And then this going to the opposite side of the world, and I do have to thank GenesisPark.com for most of these graphics that I have. They have a wonderful list of dinosaur depictions from cultures around the world that I will post to the Facebook page for you guys to view. But they also show this relief from the Dayak peoples of Borneo and Sumatra, the Far East, in Asia. And they have a bunch of artistic depictions of creatures that look like dinosaurs. And now we get to China. So this is the Yuandayo dragon figure from the Shang dynasty, which is about 2000 BC. So about the time Abraham is walking the earth. It's a funny looking creature, but it looks very much like a Cratosaurus. You got the 3 claws, plus the 1 small thumb on the short forearms. You have the 2 points on the nose, forehead, plus spines running down its back.
But he doesn't have the legs.
No, it doesn't have the legs.
He was eating better.
So we're saying this was probably 200-300 years after the flood. somewhere.
This is going to be about 250 years after Babel and probably 400 to 500 years after the flood.
They might have to shorten his legs to expand. Yeah, he's in it sitting.
Artistic license.
Yeah.
And then we see this piece from the Han Dynasty, which is dated to 206 BC to 220 AD. So this is right about the time Jesus was walking the earth. Again, it doesn't look like any creature we know of today, but it does look very similar to the Euroraptor. The neck's a little longer, which a lot of critics call that out. But the other features seem to match up. There's a couple other dinosaur-type species that are similar to what this piece looks like too. Now we get to probably the most famous one. This is Cambodia's Angkor Wat Temple in Ta Prohm. This is the Stegosaurus pictograph. Petroglyph. Petroglyph is a carving. Pictograph is painting on the rock. A lot of critics dismiss this as a hog or a pig or some other creature that has leaves or some embellishment behind it,
That's the background.
even though it looks very much like the Stegosaurus dinosaurs that we all know and love. Another thing that critics will use to try to discredit this is the fact that you don't see spikes on the tail. The two main features of the Stegosaurus are the plates on the back and spikes on the tail. Well, there's a theory for this. Answers in Genesis and other creationist scientists have gone and actually studied this in person. They see no reason to believe that the plates or embellishment or artistic leaves, because all the other leaves that are shown on this temple look nothing like this and actually go in a circle around the animal. Also, the detail and the measurements that they've taken very much point to those plates supposed to be being on the back of this creature. There's also another very interesting thing to look at. Not sure if you can see it very clearly here, but if you look at the head, you'll see this little dot, like on the cheek. If you look just above that dot, you see what looks like a little strap going across the forehead. We know from Chinese history that Chinese emperors claimed to have domesticated dragons, or at least kept dragons captive. There are some stories of people seeing Chinese emperors pulled around in carts by dragons. There's also stories from the Chinese themselves and their histories of emperors having dragons that pulled them around. Is it possible that the people from Cambodia who built the Angkor Wat temple had some domesticated dinosaurs as well for labor work? Just like certain societies used, and we used to in old times use horses or mules or donkeys for grinding, for pulling, or oxen for pulling plowshares. The details on this petroglyph very much seem to indicate that this could have been a captive stegosaurus, a small one, with a harness around its head, or muzzle, much like you would see on a dog. That would also explain why we don't see the spikes on the tails too, because why would you want this beast of burden accidentally impaling you with 2 or 3 foot long spikes when you go to unhook it from the cart? And it's also interesting to note that secular scientists don't seem to get in a huff when you make kids' toys with dinosaurs that don't have spikes on the tails, or when you make models of these creatures that also don't have spikes on the tails. It could also just be that the artist didn't want to put the spikes on. There's also reliefs of elephants that have been found carved into walls in India where they don't put the tusks on them. And while it's true that Asian elephants, the females, have really short tusks, all elephants have tusks. It could just be too delicate of a detail for the artist to have felt the need to put that on. So all the evidence points to this being a legitimate stegosaurus that was carved into this wall at the Angkor Wat temple. What does the Bible say about dinosaurs? Well, in Exodus 20:11, we're told that God made everything in 6 days, all the creatures. Dinosaurs, we know, did exist. They would have been made in those 6 days as well. Adam was made on day 6, and Eve. So we know that at least for a short period of time, dinosaurs and mankind lived together. Before I get into Job, we know that the Great Flood happened. We watched this the last 2 weeks with the Ark in the darkness. God told Noah to take 2 of each kind of animal, or 7 of each clean animal, onto the Ark. That would have included dinosaurs. And he wouldn't have had to take the big ones, he could have taken the little ones. So I know that after the flood, mankind and dinosaurs at least lived together for a little while as well. In Job chapter 40, starting in verse 15, we're told about Behemoth, a creature that lived in the swamps, the chief of God's creation. Chief meaning most powerful, the most mighty, with a tail like a cedar tree, legs of iron. Most scientists today, and sadly many theologians and scholars, will try to write that off as being a hippopotamus or an elephant. That's the saddest cedar tree I've ever seen. That's like a cedar twig hanging off its rear end. Its tail is not a cedar tree. But to say that that's a dinosaur that Job knew of, well, that flies in the face of evolutionary theory. You can't say that that Behemoth is a dinosaur if you hold to evolution. And then Job 41 talks about Leviathan, a sea monster that breathed fire, that Job couldn't pull in with hooks, couldn't tame it. Some people try to write that off as a crocodile. Like, you can catch those. Look at the crocodile hunter. He would jump on their backs for fun.
And put duct tape on them, yeah.
And put duct tape on their mouths. It doesn't sound like Job couldn't tame that. But once again, to call that a dinosaur or a creature from the dinosaur period, again flies in the face of evolutionary theory. So what would have happened then to the dinosaurs? Why don't we see them today? Well, we know that dinosaurs or dragons, the word dinosaur wasn't invented until 1841, and it just means terrible lizard, which is what dragons were. And once the word dinosaur came into being, we start seeing dragons fall off use and start seeing them kind of relegated to myth and fiction stories in movies and books. But these terrible lizards, dinosaurs, dragons, why don't we see them today? Well, the biggest thing that happened was after the flood, a huge habitat change. The flood destroyed the earth. Things were completely different. As Dr. Terry Mortensen said, it was a desert compared to what the earth used to be before the flood. Reptiles don't do overly well in a desert, in super hot environments. And dinosaurs would have needed lots of lush forests to eat, to keep themselves growing. So we have major habitat change. There's less habitat forming. We all know from experience today what happens when habitat changes. Animals go extinct when they lose habitat. We also have the ice age happen after the flood. Reptiles and ice do not go together. They will die. So lots of the ice caps were covered in ice, and that ice extended way down into the middle of North America, into Europe. And thus, along with habitat change, there's lots of ice in places of the world that forces the dinosaurs to a really restricted area, which would make sense as to why we're seeing these accounts and depictions coming from Asia, coming from Africa, coming from South America. And why we see the winged dinosaurs, or the water monsters, more spread out. And then hunting. Dinosaurs would have been an excellent source of meat for societies. You take down one of them, you're feasting for weeks. So these three major points, habitat change, ice age, and hunting, are an easy explanation for why we don't see dinosaurs today. This world is not made for dinosaurs anymore. Before the flood, we had gigantic creatures, giant beetles, giant pigs, giant sloths, giant dragonflies. This world isn't fit for giant creatures anymore. Now we want to look at ziggurats. So ziggurat. Oh boy. That line didn't get moved up. It wasn't moved up before, so alrighty then. So what are ziggurats? Basically, they're a pyramid. They're a form of monumental architecture, that's what those words say, that originated in ancient Mesopotamia, so the cradle of civilization. Ziggurat comes from the Akkadian word meaning zigguratum and means peak, pinnacle, or high place. They usually had a rectangular base and were built in a series of steps up to a platform upon which a temple was raised. So they were basically an artificial mountain raised for the worship of the gods to elevate the priests that served these gods towards the heavens. And then the priests would perform whatever rituals they were performing to honor the god from this top platform, which would then be in view of all the people gathered down below. And these were in use from, and this is the secular range, 3000 BCE to roughly 500 BCE, when the Persian Zoroastrianism changed the religious paradigm in the region from multiple deities down to kind of a dualistic good versus evil type religion. That's what Zoroastrianism is. And I put this note on here that according to Bishop James Ussher, who wrote a work called World History, I think it's World History, Histories, I forget off the top of my head, and he made a chronology from his time all the way back to creation, based on the dates in the Bible. He puts the Tower of Babel at about 2242 BCE. And other scientists and Bible scholars who have done dating, who've run dating measurements, also put it right around the 2200 era. So thus, biblically, Ziggurats would have started about 2242 BCE, or BC, according to the biblical timeline. So this is an example of a ziggurat. This is a photo of the Great Ziggurat of Ur. It's probably the most well-known ziggurat because of how photographed it is, and in such good condition it is. It's not nearly as tall as it once used to be, but you can see just how massive this building is. You have steps leading up the front, you have some steps from the sides, and then it would have been terraced or stepped up to a platform up on top, where the priest of Ur would have presented offerings and done rituals to, I think it was Inanna, who was the goddess of Ur.
Is there anything inside of it? Or is it just all?
It's all mostly
Is there
rock.
like a building in there and stuff in
No,
there?
it was meant to reach to the heavens, so there wasn't a whole lot of other purpose to these. Yeah. But here's something interesting. We see these ziggurat-type structures, or these pyramids, appear all over the world. This photo points out three: Mexico, the Mayans, Egypt, well, that's the Pyramid of Dozier, the stepped Pyramid of Saqqara, and then Indonesia, all three of which have that stepped design. And a lot of conspiracy theorists, a lot of paranormal investigators, a lot of ancient alien theorists like to throw this out there as saying, hey, aliens exist. This is proof, because how would these cultures separated across the globe all know how to build these structures that look so similar and even have 3 doors? Maybe there's a simpler explanation. But there's more. Here are 16 ziggurat pyramidal type structures located throughout the world. From Iran, the Pyramid of Dozier, Egypt. You have the King Shi Mausoleum in Xi'an, China. You have the Jebel Barkal Pyramid in Sudan. You have the Khogazanbil Ziggurat in Iran. You have the Pyramid of Cestus in Rome, although you can pretty much explain away the Roman ones because they saw the Egyptian pyramids and thus kind of modeled theirs off of that. But then you get over to America, you have the Pyramid of the Sun in Teotihuacan, Mexico. Over in China, you have the Tomb of the General in the city of Jian, China. In Indonesia, you see the Borobudur Temple. In Cambodia, you see Kol Kur, the Priang Temple. Back to America, see El Castillo in Chichen Itza, probably one of the most famous pyramids in the world, after the Great Pyramids of Egypt. I think it's Zaya tombs in Ningxia, China. And then in Polynesia, the Morongo Uta Pyramid. And then in the Americas, we have the mound building cultures. You have Cahokia with Monk's Mound, which stands over 100 feet tall, had 4 levels, has a footprint greater than that of the Great Pyramid of Giza. You have other mound building societies too, the Adena, the Hopewell, that built mounds. Not nearly as great heights, but still these pyramidal type structures. Then we have the most well-known of all, the Tower of Babel. This is one artistic depiction of it, which looks very similar to the Great Ziggurat of Ur. In 1563, Peter Bruegel the Elder made this drawing or painting of the Tower of Babel. 1594, Lucas van Valkenburg made this depiction of it. So both very similar to each other, pyramidal in shape. And Genesis 11, 1 through 9 is where we find the Great Pyramid of Babel. The Tower of Babel mentioned in the Bible. About 200 years after the flood or so, the people groups, instead of spreading out over the face of the earth like God had told them to do, decided to stick together and build themselves a tower to the heavens. And they built this tower, and they were building the city around it. It's one people, one nation, one tongue. When God came down to see what was going on. Not that he didn't already know.
His presence.
It's like when the boss walks in already knowing that you guys are messing around, and
He just wants you to know.
just wants you to know he knows and that he's there seeing all this happen. So God comes down, sees what's going on, confuses their language. And they get spread out across the face of the earth. 70 people groups. Linguistic analysis has gone back to about 70 different original language types. Interesting how modern science is affirming the Bible with that. So where was the Tower of Babel located? It says in the plains of Shinar. We know that Shinar is Babylon. So the plains of Babylon in Mesopotamia. So this would be Mesopotamia is in Iraq, Iran, that region of the world. Did you know you can see it on Google Maps? This is an actual screenshot of the Ziggurat or Tower of Babel. So this is all that remains of this Ziggurat. Its footprint, which is massive. But you can see the steps that would have gone up to it in the front. The massive square/rectangular base that would have supported a massive tower to the heavens. For scale, that would be where this is located in the world, right in the heart of Iraq. So the Tower of Babel is considered to also be known by the name Etemenanki. Did you know that Nebuchadnezzar knew of the Tower of Babel? So this is a depiction from the Smithsonian Channel of the Tower of Babel stela. And a stela is a rock monument that usually has inscriptions telling of important events from the king who erected it. So this is from Nebuchadnezzar in 600 BCE. And they've outlined the depiction so we can see it better. That's not actually how it looks. But you see Nebuchadnezzar on the right, and this ziggurat in the middle. And in Babylonian cuneiform, there is something that reads, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, am I. In order to complete, they had to fill in this word, the towers, Etemenanki and Ermimenanki, I mobilized all countries everywhere. The base I filled in to make a high terrace. I built those structures with bitumen and baked brick throughout. I completed it, raising its top to the heaven. Very, very interesting. Nebuchadnezzar knew about this, but this tells us that it was already in a state of disrepair, so he rebuilt it, along with a second one. Herodotus, who we looked at earlier concerning dragons and dinosaurs, also talks about the Tower of Babel. He says, in the middle of Babylon's precinct there was a tower of solid masonry, upon which was raised a second tower, and on top of that a third, and so on up to 8. The ascent to the top is on the outside by a path which winds around all the towers. On the topmost tower there is a spacious temple.
Remember our study we talked about, I was trying to remember what book we were in, we talked about the high places, and how God said not to tear down the high places, the kings.
2 Kings.
Yeah, Second Kings, stuff like that, exactly. Because we're always trying to worship something else
Mhm.
besides the tree on the high place, yeah.
And this structure is perfect for that because it gets you up, it raises you to the heavens to be closer to God, to be a midpoint between the heavens and the earth. But did you know that other cultures have accounts very similar to the Tower of Babel? The Geico tribe in Burma has this. In the days of Pandaman, the people determined to build a pagoda that should reach up to heaven. When the pagoda was halfway up to heaven, God came down and confounded the language of the people so that they could not understand each other. Then the people scattered, and Tanmawai, the father of the Geico tribe, came west with 8 chiefs and settled in the valley of the Saitang. So that's their origin story. And it's traced back to an event that sounds just like the Tower of Babel. The Aztec have a tradition of the giant Zahua, saved from a flood, who began building a great pyramid to reach the clouds. The project was destroyed by the gods, and the builders suddenly began speaking in different languages, resulting in utter confusion. Interesting.
From a flood, huh?
From a flood. This is on the opposite side of the world from Burma. The Toltecs in Mesoamerica, another ancient society like the Aztecs, have a legend that states that after mankind multiplied, following a great flood, a tower was built to protect them in the event of another deluge. The languages of the builders, however, were confounded and the people dispersed. So that leaves out the whole aspect that God promises us with the rainbow, that he's never going to flood the world again. But once again, it's interesting that they too have this origin story that sounds just like Babel.
Mentioning the flood and Babel.
Are any of these ziggurats as tall as the mountains of Ararat?
No. The mountains of Ararat are really tall, but this is mankind's attempt to build a religious type mountain.
Whatever happened again, they could get up high.
Yeah.
And it's like, duh. Like, yeah.
And some theologians,
Up on the top of the highest mountain.
Yeah.
Good luck with that.
some theologians have speculated that that's why they were building the Tower of Babel again, but it's pretty clear that that's not. They were coming together as one people, defying God again and saying, we're going to reach to the heavens, we're going to be above the earth and rule. But the Assyrians also have a Tower of Babel type story. This is from the Assyrian inscriptions circa 800 to 700 BCE. And it's kind of a broken up tablet, so they had to kind of guess at some of the words. But he, the father of all gods, repudiated. The thought of his heart was evil. Of Babylon he hastens to the submission. Small and great he confounded on the mound. The walls all day he founded, for their destruction in the night. He did not leave a remainder. In his anger also, his secret counsel he pours out. To confound their speeches he set his face. He gave command, he made strange their counsel.
Amen.
So, now that we've journeyed across the world, across millennia, looking at cultural stories of dragons, cultural depictions of dragons and dinosaurs, we've looked at the Tower of Babel, we've looked at pyramids around the world, we've looked at these origin stories that all originate with what sounds like the Tower of Babel. You could write that off as just being luck and coincidence. You could write that off as, okay, maybe in trade, they traded stories and thought that was cool, we're going to make something like that too. Or this all just goes to show that the Bible is 100% true and reliable.
I like that one.
I like that
And when
one
they were
too.
scattered, they all had the same origin to base it on.
Exactly. And as they spread, they would have taken this story, they would have taken sightings of dinosaurs, they would have taken the idea of the ziggurat with them as they spread throughout the world. And when they settled, it's interesting that all these pyramids have religious connotations to them. They're not just pretty buildings. They're not hollow inside for people to stay at like a hotel, or for trade and commerce to happen at. Even the Egyptian tomb pyramids are religious, so that they could make it to the afterlife, so that the gods would see this massive building and recognize their greatness. And these other societies throughout the world, in Asia, in the Middle East, in the Americas, in South America, build pyramids for religious purposes, with buildings on top to sacrifice in, to worship the gods in, to perform religious rituals in. It's way too coincidental that they all decided randomly to do this, or that at one point in time, when society happened to catch wind of this and thought, oh, I think we should do that too, because all these pyramids date way back. So archaeology, history, and cultural beliefs all are from the biblical record. And when you view cultural phenomena and legends, such as origin stories, pyramids and ziggurats, dinosaurs and dragons, through a biblical lens, everything makes sense. Yeah, there are details that we don't know and that we'll never fully understand. But it makes sense when you view it through the Bible lens. There's way too many loopholes and mental gymnastics and stretches of the imaginations. And having to be literally ignorant of the facts and history to try to say anything else. We see that dinosaurs and humans existed together, at least for a short period of time after the flood. They might not have lived all the way to our day and age, or even a few hundred years ago, but people would have known this and carried on these stories as dragons. And yes, these stories are going to get embellished and grow over time, and thus take on mythic quality. And as Paul tells us in Romans 1, people in their suppression of the truth and their rejection of God are going to worship the creature rather than the creator. And dragons, dinosaurs, are going to be mighty, powerful creatures that, wow, maybe we should worship them, like you see the Chinese do. So it's all very interesting. And there's a whole lot more that could be gone into on this. There's so many stories, origin stories. There's so many stories of dinosaurs and dragons. There's so many other depictions of them in cultural histories that we could be here for weeks and weeks looking at all of them. But even more fun than that is being able to study the Bible and see how all this cultural and historical phenomena just shows how amazing the Bible really is. John 17:17, sanctify them by the truth. Your word is truth. Heavenly Father, thank you for this fascinating and fun study on dinosaurs, dragons, and ziggurats. And thank you that you have left all these cultural markers that point to you and point to the Bible and just show and affirm over and over and over again for those who haven't hardened their hearts and rejected you, that your word is true and that we can stand on it no matter what. Lord, I pray that you were glorified through all this. Pray that we all learned something and grew to love you and glorify you more through all this. I pray that you watch over each and every one of us as we head home and tackle the rest of this week. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.